Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Last time I left you, we had finished off the subfloor in the estuary boat refurbishment. There was a lot more to be done, but it was now time to fit it out from the bottom up, so stay tuned if you want to check it out. The second part of this article will also be published in digital magazine Australian Boating Mags, issue 263. We decided that we wanted to utilise the area under the large front casting deck, so we had to fabricate some compartments for storage. We wanted rod lockers, a space for the fuel tank, an area for the 2 dual batteries to go, and other bits and pieces. And this is how we came up with this configuration. Dennis used the transom template to help shape the risers, and the rest was pretty straightforward. After we had all the components cut out, they were scuffed up and resin coated before they were screwed together. We decided to leave a little gap in the compartment floor so that any water would free flow to the rear of the boat where the bilge pump is. Now we could go ahead and glue the compartment into position. Dennis used the piping gun to pipe out the glue onto the floor. Once the structure was pushed down into position, we could use the excess glue to cove the edges. This would make a nice rounded edge for the fiberglass to be placed onto later on. We decided that the rear would have 3 compartments, one of which would hold the start battery. We left the same gap in the floor for the centre compartment, so that if any water entered the deck, it could free flow to the bilge pump at the rear. The compartments were constructed but not glued into position yet, as we had a few other things to attend to before doing that. We made sure to cut the new bung holes in the exact position where the enlarged bung holes were cut in the last video. This is where the filler was placed to prevent water leakage into the transom. Now we had a massive job of fiberglass in the front compartment into position. Fiberglass in the construction was going to give it a watertight seal so it would prevent it from rotting down the track. We started with strips of fiberglass chop strand to seal in all the edges and the corners first. The fiberglass chop strand is much more easier and pliable to put into position. Once that was done, we could now lay a layer of the combination double bias and chop matting. This was laid over the larger areas and extended down past all the corners. This gave it good adhesion to the hull and the floor. Before going for a stability test in the boat at our local dam, we needed to install the electric motor. We also borrowed a trailer from a mate to transport the boat to the dam.
That's how easy it is. Hi guys, I wanted to give you a quick explanation why I haven't been fishing much lately. As you can see, I've got this neat little project behind me here. We are totally revamping this boat. We've completely cut out the stringers, the decks, everything, done a new transom. So this is going to be my new estuary boat. So you guys are going to get a lot more videos of me on the water, and I'm totally psyched to have this little estuary boat. It's going to be awesome. So what's happening tomorrow? We're going to take it to the dam, fill up that black
We used leftover marine ply and leftover honeycomb board to start forming up a side console shape. So that little chunk of timber there will get taken out, same with that, and same with that long riser. We'll just be left with the front plate, and then the head plate. And then we've used the honeycomb board as the sides, so we've got that beautiful curve there. She's going to look schmicko when she's all fiberglassed up and painted. Better than buying a $500 console. Minimum, exactly. And this is going to fit exactly how we want it in my boat. After the glue had gone off, I could remove all the supports that were holding the console together. I then used the combination double bias and chop to hold the bottom together. We trimmed up any excess honeycomb board and routed down any timber edges. Now she was ready for fiberglassing. After giving the console multiple coats of fiberglass, I was happy with how strong it would be. We had roughly marked out where I wanted my Lowrance sounders to be positioned on the front of the console. I had room for a 9-inch, a 5-inch or even a 7-inch side by side. There was also room for the helm wheel and a cluster of gauges for the motor. In our design, we also made sure there was plenty of room on the inside of the console for the rest of the electronics. It was time to start fiberglassing the newly fabricated gunnels. Dennis scuffed up the PVC with the grinder to give the resin and the fiberglass something to stick to. Dennis started by using the 350 gram chop strand up and over the new gunnel edge. After the chop strand layer, he then laid a layer of the fiberglass cloth matting. This cloth matting is a very tight, strong weave and would give the gunnels a lot of strength. Lastly, a layer of chop strand was placed over the top of the cloth. We had even tagged in some supports from underneath, giving the gunnel extra strength. The new fabrication was given a coat of filler in preparation for sanding and then painting. We decided to use honeycomb board for the decking because it's much lighter than traditional marine ply, but also just as strong. The honeycomb board consists of thousands of straws side by side and is enclosed with a fibrous matting on the top and bottom. It comes in 1.2 by 2.4 metre sheets. One sheet costs around about $70, which is very comparable to marine ply, and is very easy to cut even with a jigsaw. Unfortunately, this is the first time that we'd used honeycomb board, and we ended up having a bit of a costly mistake. Here's what I think happened. We were fiberglassing in the direct sunlight, which actually makes the resin go off faster and heat up. Because the resin was going off faster, the fiberglass was getting harder quicker. And because the sheets are predominantly made of plastic, it started to bow the other side of the board. It wasn't until 15 minutes later when we came back to check on the boards that we noticed that it was actually bowing. There was no way we could stop this process from happening at the time. So we decided to make a cooler batch of resin which would actually go off slower. And instead of fiberglassing outside, we ended up taking everything into the garage where it was nice and cool and shady. Luckily, we had just enough honeycomb board to finish off the project. Each board received 2 coats of chop strand on one side, and 1 layer of combination double bias and chop strand on the other. This was way more than enough strength for the boards. Here's a little tip for you. We found that if we coated the board first in resin, and then coated the underside of the double bias, this way it was much easier to saturate the double bias matting from the top. Next up, we had to fabricate some aluminium trims to finish off the edges of the honeycomb board. The C channel acts as a capping to the honeycomb board, and the L channel acts as a bit of a seat for the C channel to sit down onto. To finish off the welds, I ground them back a little bit, just so that they were a little bit smoother. This was one of the trickiest things to finish off the honeycomb board, but we did pretty good, but it's not super watertight. Now that we had finished fiberglassing all the honeycomb board sheets, we could cut off any excess fiberglass that was overhanging. Dennis used the jigsaw on some of the curved angles, and he also used the plunge saw on the big long straights. It's actually pretty hard to cut through the thick pieces of fiberglass, and it actually bluntens the blades pretty quick. It was really exciting to see all the deck pieces in position, but we still had a lot of work ahead of us. I feel like this has been a never-ending angle grinding job, but if the surface isn't prepared properly, then the fiberglass won't stick to it, so it has to be done. Now that all the honeycomb boards had been cut out, we could give the edges a light sand in preparation for the C-channel to be glued on. Dennis placed a bead of Sikaflex down each side of the C-channel. He then lined up the C-channel on the honeycomb board and then bashed it on with the hammer. Once we had all the aluminium angle in position, we could go ahead and Sikaflex this part of the deck into its right spot. Anywhere the deck was going to come in contact with the hull, or the risers, Dennis put a bead of Sikaflex. Once this part of the deck was in position, we could clamp it down so it was nice and tight. Now that the front deck was in position, we had to secure it to the hull. This is certainly not a fun procedure. As you can see, I've got my goggles on and it's very fumey inside the hull. So I was wearing my protection so my eyes were nice and safe. We used 350 gram chopped strand strips to tag the deck into position. To give the tagging in extra strength, we used the combination double bias and chop to finish it off. Next, we Sikaflexed the remaining part of the deck into position. This also had to be tagged in for extra strength on the sides. We could now move on to the top side of the deck. Anywhere there was a little gap was given a coat of filler, and then once the filler had gone off and sanded back, we could tag the top part in as well. Before applying the aluminium trim to the freshly cut honeycomb board edges, the edges were given another coat of resin just to make sure they were nice and sealed. Getting the aluminium trim to line up in perfect 90-degree angles is actually quite a hard task. Getting everything perfectly square and lined up actually took quite a bit of effort. I was very impressed with Dennis's persistence and efforts, and I think the deck turned out amazing. It was time to finish off the rear compartments and put the decking and the hatch lids on top. We had one little concern though, and that was the splash well. We weren't quite sure whether the hydraulic steering arm was going to hit the splash well when the motor was trimmed up. So we thought we'll just leave this part of the deck out for now, until the time comes to put it into position. Here's a little close-up of Dennis tapping the aluminium angle into position. You can see how hard it is to get it straight and on the perfect angle. So this is happening. That's a bit exciting. It's happening, Dennis. After months of searching for an affordable 4-stroke outboard motor, we ended up going back to one that we saw at the very beginning, and that was one at Dolby. The outboard actually came from a marine mechanic. He said he'd been servicing the motor for years, and the motor had only really ever been run in fresh water. That was a massive bonus for us. So here it is, my 2006 90 horsepower 4-stroke Mercury.
That's what I'm saying now.
Now that we finally had an outboard, we could drill holes into the transom for the motor bolts. Finding the exact centre of the boat seemed to be a little bit of an issue, as the shape of the boat was not completely symmetrical from factory. So after a lot of marking and measuring, Dennis bit the bullet and chose his centre line. We borrowed a special jig off a mate so that when you're drilling it gives you perfect placement. The day had finally come to flip the boat so we could start sanding it in preparation for painting, but we needed to figure out how exactly we were going to flip it first. Luckily, we had a scaffold, a steel beam, a telegraph pole, and from this we could set up some block and tackles. Unfortunately, we only had the one block and tackle, and we had a rope at the other end, but luckily we had a mate to help us, and we eventually got her flipped over. This was the first time we'd actually had a really good look at the underside of the hull. It had general wear and tear, especially on the keel, which needed a little bit of fiberglassing, but the rest of the hull was perfect. We started by giving the hull a really good sand back, including the transom area. Next, any little spots that had wear and tear or little gouges were filled with the high build primer. This is a thicker paint which fills in little gouges and dips. Any larger scratches or dents were filled with the body filler. Looking pretty good. Festo cut that time in 1/4. Prepping the hull for painting is one of the most important parts of the painting job. Even the transom was looking pretty good, but it was time for one last sand before we used the wax and grease remover to get rid of any stickiness or residues before doing a filler coat of paint. This first full coat of high build primer starts to level out any other little imperfections that are still in the hull. As you can see, we are spraying the boat outside, and this is not the most desirable conditions to be spraying a boat in, but we had to work with what we had. Now that the first coat of high build primer had dried, we could sand it back and give it another coat all over again. This next coat continues to level anything else out and fill in little dips and scratches. The final sand before the final layer of paint. Any imperfections are going to show up in the paint job if they're not sanded out now. For our final coat, we're using the Jotun Hardtop Ultra. This is a 2-component chemically curing acrylic polyurethane coating. It has a glossy finish with a very good gloss retention. Unfortunately, we were running out of time to get the boat finished, so we could only do one coat on the boat. Dennis did have a good compromise though. As you can see, he's doing a fine dust coat first, which stays a little tacky, and then he does a final coat over that, which is much thicker and glosses off. Most of what I'm showing you in these videos is fast forwarded, so I'd really like to show you how slow the process is. For an outside spray job in the elements, I'm pretty bloody happy with how the results turned out. Look how shiny it is! Like I said, we didn't have much time to finish the boat off, so we had to flip the boat back as soon as we possibly could. So only 2 days later after painting the boat, we were ready to flip it back. This time we had a second block and tackle, which made things a lot easier. This still wasn't the easiest way to flip the boat, but we had no choice. And so we did the best we could. She ended up with a few minor scratches on the side, but I wasn't too concerned because I knew we were going to vinyl wrap the boat anyway, so you wouldn't even see it. Now that the boat was flipped back, we could concentrate on finishing off any other little bits and pieces before we could paint the top side. This included filling, sanding, and fiberglassing. It felt like a never-ending job, but I think we were on the home stretch. It was time to finalise where our newly fabricated side console was going to sit. This was the last time I could adjust the height of the console before we fiberglassed it in. After a few minor adjustments, it was time to make it a permanent fixture of the boat. Clamping the console to the side of the boat ensured it wasn't going to move during the fiberglassing process. As you can see, the console's already had its filler coats in preparation for painting. I was so excited that everything was starting to come together. We had a motor and a trailer, and that meant we could finally do a water test on this little hull. You know, we hadn't even tested the motor yet, so that was going to be the next piece in the puzzle. There was only 4 weeks until we had to have the boat complete for the Flathead Classic fishing competition. Thanks for watching episode 2. I hope that our journey inspires some of you to start your own projects as well. Even though this is a massive project to take on, I feel very proud for what we have done. If you'd like to read up on this complete process in episode 2, it will be in issue 263 of Australian Boating Magazine. Guys, did you know that Australian Boating Magazine is actually a digital magazine? You can download it off the internet, so everyone can read my write-ups. Thanks again for all your support, guys. I really appreciate it. If you like this episode, please hit that little thumbs up. Drop me a comment down below and make sure you stay tuned to the end of this episode to see what happens in episode 3.